Hello, I'm Andy Oakley on New Zealand Issues. Today's issue is the second instalment on why the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975 is fraudulent misrepresentation and must be repealed. So far we've discovered that the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975 is racist because although the treaty is addressed to all New Zealanders, it states within the Act that only people of the Māori race can make claims. And considering this legislation has netted Māori $4 billion in claims and back rents, I doubt the world has seen a more profitable racist act and legislation per capita. We have learned that the first sentence in the preamble of the Treaty of Waitangi Act is a lie because it states that the treaty was between the Crown and Māori. However, there were no people in New Zealand pre the treaty known as Māori people. The treaty is an inclusive document addressed to all the people of New Zealand. We've also learned of the fraudulent changing of a small m to a capital M in the Act to make it appear as though there were Māori people and the treaty is addressed to them. And today I'm going to show you that the second sentence in the preamble is also fraud because it states, and whereas the text of the treaty in the English language differs from the text of the treaty in the Māori language. These apparent differences were the excuse used to set up the tribunal who would investigate the differences. Well, this is a lie too. In Schedule 1 of the Treaty of Waitangi Act, there's an English text version of the treaty entitled The Text in English, when in actual fact no such document ever existed. And apart from at Waitangi February 6, 1840, no English treaty was read to any chief who subsequently went on to sign it. The following is a synopsis of the events in early 1840 New Zealand that indicate this fraud. 2 days before the treaty was signed, on February the 4th, 1840, the final English draft of the Treaty of Waitangi was written on paper, which bears a W. Tucker 1833 watermark. All available evidence points to the fact that this final drafting session took place at James Clendon's Okiato home, with Clendon, the acting US consul, along with others, advising and supplying the paper. The final text wording was written by James Busby under the direction and approval of Governor Hobson. Busby dated the document the 4th of February 1840, and Clendon took the opportunity to describe a copy to dispatch to his American superiors. Clendon's document was later dispatched on the 20th of February 1840 and is known as Dispatch Number 6. A microfilm of this document, which matches Busby's draft, is contained in the Auckland Library, the Auckland University Library, and also the National Archives. Busby's 4th of February draft in English, which today is known as the Littlewood Treaty, was rediscovered in 1989 at the house of a descendant of Henry Littlewood's, who was James Clendon's solicitor. This was 14 years after the introduction of the Treaty of Waitangi Act. And in the absence of the true English draft in the Act, they have used an unofficial and incorrect English version of the treaty. So what is possibly the most important document in New Zealand's entire history, the English draft of the treaty, is not on display, while the completely unofficial Declaration of Independence, which had little or no effect on New Zealand history because they never actually had a meeting at all, was also written by James Busby, is on display. Now, the reason Busby's English draft, which matches Te Tiriti word for word, is not on display is that it would mean there would be no requirement for the Waitangi Tribunal to investigate text differences, as we know exactly what the words mean, and they do not state that Māori could have self-rule or tēnā rangatiratanga, nor do they state that Māori own intangible treasures such as the air, water and everything else imaginable. As I stated earlier, there weren't any people known as Māori in 1840. Anyway, back to the 5th of February 1840, when Hobson took Busby's completed English draft to Henry Williams and asked him if he, along with his son Edward, could translate it into the Ngāpuhi dialect. I say the Ngāpuhi dialect as there was no official Māori language in 1840. There were various versions of the language and dialects all over New Zealand at the time. When complete, Busby revised the document and it was transcribed to the parchment. This took place on the 5th of February 1840, and at midday Hobson and his entourage took their seats on the platform at Waitangi. He delivered a speech explaining the benefits to all the people of New Zealand, and then he read the English text to the Assembly of Natives and Settlers. The English text he read was not the English version we have today in today's legislation. That document was not in existence on February 5th, 1840. It was Busby's English draft that was read. Could you imagine the uproar by those bilingual at the meeting if there were differences in the English and native language treaties? Te Tiriti was written in the Ngāpuhi dialect, and that was the only official version to be conveyed or presented to chiefs prior to signing. 8 copies of Te Tiriti were taken around New Zealand to gather signatures, and on the 11th of April 1840, Reverend Monsell conducted a treaty presentation to about 1,500 chiefs at Waikato Heads. At this meeting, Monsell did not have the official treaty in Māori, as it hadn't arrived in time. Instead, he used a copy of the printed sheet, also in Māori, which had room for about 7 signatures. Now, he had also in his possession one of many variable texts of the treaty in English by James Freeman, Hobson's secretary. And he used that sheet to gather the rest of the signatures that didn't fit on the printed sheet. After the meeting at Waikato and Manukau Heads, Monsell fixed the unofficial English text treaty by James Hobson, containing the overflow signatures, to the rear of the official Maori sheet, and they were filed. And when one analyses those documents today in the treaty drafts contained in Archives New Zealand, it's plain to see that the English version of the treaty that the government have mistakenly used is one James Freeman wrote, which was concocted sometime after February 6, using the drafting notes from the 3rd of February 1840, which had been discarded when Busby did the final draft a day later. And that's why it doesn't match the official tiriti in Māori. Busby's English draft, which matches Te Tiriti word for word, was filed along with other documents with James Clendon's solicitor, Henry Littlewood. With the treaty signed and the much more arduous task of setting up a government and the introduction of law and order, the treaty was largely forgotten. It had some historical interest, but nothing more, as it was a fairly simple document that gave permission for New Zealand to be governed by the British. New Zealand became a separate crown colony by royal charter in the letters patent issued by Queen Victoria on the 16th of November 1840. Now this is the date we should be celebrating as a nation, not February the 6th, as this was just one of many dates where signatures were gathered for the treaty. So there we have it. There was no English text treaty. The English text version in our legislation is a fraud, and the government have known this since the discovery of the Littlewood document in 1989. There is no requirement for the Waitangi Tribunal to investigate text differences because the English text and the Māori text match word for word. There's also no possible way for the Crown to breach anything written in the treaty when reading the English text. And this throws doubt on every single treaty settlement there has ever been. This is all detailed in my book, Once We Were One, The Fraud of Modern Separatism. I've been Andy Oakley. Noho ora mai.